Hi, everybody. Welcome to Act Now. I'm Julianna Forlano. Thanks for joining us on the program today. We have Richard Wolff talking to us about student loan debt and the debt forgiveness that activists are asking for. He has an interesting take that's not exactly what you might expect from an economist of his background. We're also going to be covering two action reports. There's a lot going on in the progressive action sphere. There was a march in Washington, D.C. for voting rights last week, activists taking to the street, fighting against Jim Crow laws that state legislatures are trying to pass. And a group has calculated the costs of all the wars that the U.S. has been involved in since 9/11. It's going maybe not to shock you, but there's a discussion that I think needs to be had, and we're going to talk about that. So stick with us. Leave us a comment, follow, like, all of that stuff coming up. The action report on the march in Washington. Last week, voting rights activists took to the street to fight against state legislatures who are seeking to push this country back to the Jim Crow era where no one wants to go except the racists and the corporatists. 48 states have introduced 389 bills to suppress the vote, and that is only since January of this year. And far too many of those bills have already become law. The laws do things like banning ballot drop boxes and mail-in voting, reducing early voting days and hours, restricting who can get a mail-in ballot, prohibiting officials from promoting the use of mail-in ballots, even when voters qualify for that, and even criminalizing the distribution of water or food to voters waiting in the long lines that these policies create. Voting, you have to risk your life to vote in these hot climate areas where you have to stand in line for hours. This is just undemocratic. We're going to be talking to investigative journalist Greg Palast on the show tomorrow about exactly what the GOP is up to in Georgia and elsewhere. But today we're going to take a look at the recent March On for Voting Rights, which not only happened in D.C., but there were marchers across the country, Miami, Phoenix, Atlanta, your town, probably. And like every organization you've ever heard of was there, Common Cause, Higher Heights, GLAD, SEIU, American Muslim, ADC, the Sierra Club, United Church of Christ. I mean, everybody was involved because any group working for any kind of justice knows that democracy is actually the key to it all. And the activists did it right on the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's historic March on Washington, where in front of the Lincoln Memorial, as you know, King delivered that historic I Have a Dream speech calling on our nation to rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. Some of the organizers said, this is a quote from the organizers there, that marching is a form of nonviolent protest, and protest is a form of democratic expression older than America itself. We are marching today to shine the light of truth on what is happening in state legislatures and to ensure that Americans understand what's at stake, and also to give people a mechanism to demand action on the most urgent issue of our generation. It's funny, you look outside and you think, gee, maybe climate change is the most urgent issue of our generation, but without democracy, we will not be addressing climate change. So I agree with these organizers for sure. act.tv, of course, was live at the march to amplify their light and to spread those truths far and wide. act.tv's Jocelyn McCurdy-Keats spoke to one marcher about why he is participating today. This is Alex Rios.
We're out here for voting rights because there is an onslaught on our right to vote. Over 400 restrictive voting measures have been introduced in the legislature across 50 states. We can't stand by any longer to allow our voting rights to be infringed upon. We had a historic turnout last year in the 2020 election. That means that expansive measures were introduced and passed and allowed so that people could vote in the most accessible election under the harshest circumstances. And those rights, those access rights, are being rolled back across the country. We can't stand to let that happen. We are still in a pandemic. We are still at risk of losing our rights. we still need more access to the ballot, not just for the able-bodied, but for the sick, for the elderly, for those who work multiple jobs, for those who are people of color who have multiple jobs and are caretakers. We need more access, not less. And so we are here to protect our rights to vote, because what we need are permanent voting rights, not periodic voting rights. We need them to be long-lasting and generational, and that's what we're here for today.
So today's the 58th anniversary of Dr. King's March. What is it like to be marching for the same things that he had to march for almost 60 years ago?
What I'll say is this, is clearly we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. Because of Dr. King's march, because of that march 50 years ago, we are able to march today. But for that march, we would not be able to march today. So I am happy and proud to be able to do that today, in that legacy. What is upsetting is that we have to fight for the same fights of the previous generation. That should not be. It's a travesty. It's an American travesty. We cannot let that stand. And I am part of the generation who benefited, a beneficiary of that march, and I don't want to pass on a legacy of inequity to the next generation. So I'm here in the shadows and on the shoulders of those who came before us. I'm proud to be here, but I don't want my kids to have to be here 50 years from now.
Well, and so you mentioned the 400 voter suppression bills that are in the state legislatures. I think that, I don't think people really realize how bad it is and how rapidly it happened. I mean, it's overwhelming.
Yeah, it's clearly overwhelming, and it's a direct retaliation against all of us and all of those who came out in massive numbers to vote. And those who have enjoyed suppressive efforts and enjoyed having the majority of the vote are now retaliating against those who have come out. We brought out our folks in record numbers from all persuasions, from all backgrounds, and we brought out our folks to change the fabric of this country. And they're trying to rip those threads away, and we're here to bring those back.
That was Alex Rios talking to Jocelyn McCurdy-Keats of ActTV, who was on the scene there. Did you notice a lot of other media networks on the scene there? Did not. There were a number of marchers we got to talk to, and then a number of folks who spoke from the podium. People that, as I was putting this piece together, I was just blown away. So let's listen in on some of the other marchers and what they had to say.
This is personal for me. I attended the 40th anniversary. I attended the one 2 years ago, and I plan to be here now because the big lie has to die. And I feel like if we don't change this, our country is gone. We're not going to survive. And I just think it's important for us to be here.
I'm out here supporting the Voting Act.
Good. Thank you, by the way.
Sure.
It is a beautiful crowd out here. Is it just me, or is the energy very good right now?
It's a combination. It's the energy of the people. You know what I mean? If everybody here for the same cause.
If you're 16 in Maryland or DC and Virginia now, you can pre-register to vote.
I did not know that.
Yep.
Okay.
With Virginia, it just passed with the recent law, but Virginia, DC, and Maryland have been doing it for a while.
Okay, awesome. How else can people get involved?
They're here, so that's great. I'm volunteering with Headcount, and we're registering people to vote here. We're sending everything off for people to get registered. You can also use the other side of this, where we're letting people send messages directly to their senators and representatives, right here. So you can send them something right now at the march, and also you can just make your voice heard however you know how.
Fighting for justice! Fighting for justice! Protecting our voting rights! Protecting our voting rights!
So what brings you out here?
Voting rights, protecting voting rights of people.
As you should.
As we should. We don't have that much of a problem in Illinois, but we're here supporting everybody else. Georgia, Texas, other places. Yeah, it's getting really bad. And if we don't stand up and continue to fight, no one will stand up and fight. 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, and here in 2021, we're still fighting the same fight. It's amazing that we'll be having this conversation right now, and it's kind of frustrating.
Well, I'm 63, and I was a kid when all that voting rights and civil rights was going on, and I didn't understand, being so young, and I can't even believe that it's been this long. We still have to do this fight.
We cannot be silent. We cannot stand and wait and hope somebody's going to do what we need to do. We need to come together and put an action behind your words.
So you've been organizing with Action Network. Are you frustrated that you still have to talk about this?
Yeah, I'm very frustrated because I'm 58 years old. 58 years ago, I'm sure my people, my parents, my uncle, my family was involved, right? And I'm meeting people here, and we're still standing up for the same thing. When will the people who run this country decide to do what they said, which is be a voice for the people? So yeah, it is very frustrating. So and here we are fighting. That's what I even posted today. You're fighting for the same thing 58 years later.
Members of the King family were in attendance. The audio feed to the covering media outlets hit some technical snags there, but the family did make a video statement, and their speeches that they gave at the DC event reflected the themes that are included in this video. Here it is.
America was built on the power of protest. On moments when our voices launched movements. But none more pivotal than this.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
On this day, 58 years ago, my father, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., challenged America to live up to its promise for all of us. To recognize that every voice deserves to be heard.
But now, some are trying to silence us.
So it's time to get louder.
Without voting rights for all, there is democracy for none.
That's why today we have to march.
Raise our voices.
Pick up the phone.
To cause a little good trouble.
And make this country live up to its promise for all Americans.
So rise up, America.
Rise up.
Your voice is your power.
The time to use it is now.
There were so many notable activists who spoke powerfully at the march. Here is Domingo Garcia, the national president of LULAC.
I'm going to tell you a little story. When I was 10 years old, my father and mother, who didn't speak English, were illiterate, were going through a small town in Texas. And they stopped at a gas station to get burgers. And when we got there, the man, a white man, told my father this and pointed at a sign. My father couldn't read. He asked me to read it for him. That sign said, no Mexicans, no Negroes, no dogs allowed. Okay? I tell you that because that struggle continues today. I am from Dallas, Texas. And in Texas yesterday, the Republican court approved and the legislature passed a voter suppression bill. Let me ask you a question. Should it be illegal to give people who have waited 6 or 7 hours to vote water? Should it be illegal? Should it be illegal to give an absentee ballot to a senior citizen so they can vote by home by mail? Should that be illegal? Should it be illegal to take souls to the polls or Latinos to the polls? Then we need to stand back and fight back. Su voto es su voz. Your vote is your voice. And there are people who are trying to stifle our voice. But we won't let them. And let me just tell the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, as soon as you sign that voter suppression bill, LULAC will file the lawsuit the very next day to stop you from taking our right to vote. Sometimes good trouble, you got to start it. Sometimes you got to break the law to change the law. I don't have a problem giving water to a senior citizen who's waiting to vote. And if they arrest me for it, I'm willing to go to jail. So was Rosa Parks. So was Cesar Chavez. We got to be able to stand up and defend everybody's right to vote, no matter who, where they may be. And finally, for every Jose and Maria who's toiling out in the fields today to put crops and vegetables on our tables, every Jose and Maria who is washing the bathrooms at a hotel or a restaurant today, to the people who are working in meatpacking plants to put pork chops and chicken and steaks on our tables, they need a voice that can stand up and say, we need to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We need to have OSHA enforce the worker protections of COVID for all workers that are essential. And that's the way we're going to do it. So I look forward to working with Martin Luther King III, who came and marched with us for immigrant rights down on the border so that children wouldn't be put in cages. I want to thank Al Sharpton for inviting me here today, and for everybody who's working to make sure that when we say with liberty and justice for all, we mean all. Thank you. Muchísimas gracias.
Garcia he's the national president of LULAC. Ben Jealous was there. He's the current president of People for the American Way and former president of the NAACP. Here's what he had to say.
My name is Ben Jealous, the former national president of the NAACP, president of People for the American Way. I'm here with my chairman, Reverend Tim McDonald of Atlanta. Earlier this week, we in the League of Women Voters led civil disobedience outside the White House because it's time for Joe Biden to stand up and say, filibuster be damned, we must pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We must pass the For the People Act. If Donald Trump could tell his Senate to get the filibuster out of the way to pack the Supreme Court with far right-wing justices who do not represent the mores of the American people, then I think Joe Biden can say, get the filibuster out of the way so we can save our democracy. What prompted our civil disobedience in the campaign that we're building at the White House, quite frankly, were Joe Biden's comments at his CNN town hall meeting, where he suggested that these laws can't diminish people from voting. They can't suppress people's votes. He said, people are just going to vote. It is ahistorical. It is deeply disturbing the fact that the president of these United States might believe that voter suppression laws cannot impact the vote should worry all of us. My grandma turns 105 this November. I'm a Kappa, so my Delta sister's back there. She's the oldest member of Delta Sigma Theta in the country. She's the granddaughter of slaves. Her grandfather was born a slave. He died a state legislator. She knew him like I know her. And she carries with her his pain. See, my grandma trained a young woman who would become a senator named Barbara Mikulski when she was a social worker. My grandma has been in this fight for a long time, and she carries her grandfather's pain because her grandfather served towards the end of Reconstruction. And he lived with the pain of having watched many of his colleagues vote to suppress the votes of his constituents, specifically so that men like him could never serve again. And that's why my grandmother was in the streets for the Voting Rights Act. President Biden, please understand history. You are called on to be like President Johnson. Yes, to lead on the economy, to struggle with terrible wars, but also to lead on civil rights, to lead on voting rights, to push the Senate to get the job done. Honestly speaking, as a descendant of slaves, we never signed up for jobs but no rights. Whether you are a white working class woman who's going to have your ability to vote made more difficult, or a black working class man who will have his ability to vote made more difficult by these laws, or you're a citizen of Georgia where the state legislature is fixing to make it possible to just overturn the election if they don't like the results. This is a crisis. President Biden went to the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia last month. He said, this is one of the biggest crises ever facing our democracy. Well, Joe, if that's what you believe, then all I have to say is this, and say it with me, please. Hey, Joe, the filibuster has got to go. Hey, Joe. The filibuster has got to go. Let's pass these laws and save our democracy. God bless.
That was Ben Jealous. How fabulous. I love that chant. Democratic representative from Texas is 18. Sheila Jackson Lee was also in attendance, and she spoke as well.
I am tired of being tired. Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being tired. I don't want the clock to stop me from finding my justice. I don't want the clock to tell me, just wait a little bit longer. I don't want it to be said, just be patient just a little bit longer. And so I'm here today to reflect upon our ancestors, those who were enslaved for 246 years. Most people don't want to be reminded of that time in our history. And in that time of slavery, we suffered the brutality of the whip, separated from our families, longing for freedom. And in that Emancipation Proclamation and in that Juneteenth, now a federal holiday, somebody said that you were free. With freedom comes privilege and rights. It comes the honest ability to own property. I saw a brother out there and he said, can you just tell them that homeless people need rights? And I told him I would say it gives us a privilege of not being homeless, not being hungry, not being thirsty, not being without a job. That's what freedom is all about. And yet we come to this time in this moment when people are telling us to wait, continue to be homeless, be evicted, don't have the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, don't worry about voting. You can't have the 51st state in Washington, D.C. They don't need to vote. And I'm telling you that I am ready now, as I have been ready before. I don't know if you are ready, but I am. You see, I've got these shoes on, and I'm not going to stop anymore. I'm not going to wait anymore. I'm going to be able to say all things through Christ, but as well I'm going to say we are blessed with inalienable rights, and those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For that reason, we are gathered here today. I thank you, Reverend Al Sharpton. I thank you, Martin Luther King III, and your family. I thank you all for laying the groundwork. Now it's time for us to run without ceasing. We cannot have poll taxes again. We cannot have brutality again. We cannot be counting the jelly beans in the jar again. But right now, we have the most suppressive voting laws in the entire history of America. We cannot be worse than 1965. Maybe you didn't walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but you got to take these shoes and you got to begin to walk. In a couple of weeks, the United States Senate will return. It is my mission and commitment to show them the respect of their position, but I will not rest. I will not wait. My conscience, my courage, I will not. The question is your conscience and your courage. As I said on the floor of the House, is there courage in this place? Is there courage in the United States Senate? Is there courage in America? Is there now a time when we cannot rest, but we must go forward and determine that it is time now for the Voting Rights Act to be passed? It is time now for H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparations. It is time. It is time for George Floyd. It is time for all that brings dignity to human beings. And so, my brothers and sisters, I am a student of the movement. I'm a card-carrying member. But you know what? The question is, are you just a member of the movement? Or are you prepared to drive that movement? Are you a card-carrying member of so many different groups? Are you proud to stand up and say, I'm a member of this, I'm a member of this, I'm a member of the First Baptist Church in America? but are you prepared to be a soul-driving fighter for justice? Are you prepared to engage in nonviolence, civil disobedience? Are you prepared to get arrested? Are you prepared to stand up for justice? I got arrested because I believe that voting rights is determining what we are all about. Yes, I'm a legislator. But the question is, do I legislate with courage or do I step backwards? I believe that if you are out here, 2 or 3 are gathered, remember what I said, we can do all things through Christ who empowers us. And no weapons formed against you shall prosper. So what I'm saying to you now is Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas that has the worst voting rights, voting laws that deprives those Texans of voting in the nation. Texas is the worst state to vote in the entire nation. And so I'm empowered in the spirit of Barbara Jordan and Mickey Leland, who held this seat before me. I'm empowered by their spirit. And I hope that I am driving forward all of you to be able to say that in this book that John Lewis provided in his last days, he offered messages of conscience. Do you do something because it is consciously right? He offered messages of justice. Do you not step back when justice is being trampled on? He offered messages of dealing with courage. Is there courage here? Is there courage out there? Something is happening in America, something that we are got to overcome, something in healthcare, something in COVID-19, something in Delta, something in justice. We must take our shoes and carry on.
That was Senator, Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas. I didn't realize Texas was the worst state for voting. I for sure thought it was Georgia. Al Green is also speaking on the obligations of our current Democratic leadership. Here he is.
We cannot, as Democrats, control the House, the Senate, and the presidency and not deliver on the things that the people who sent us there to do. When you control the House and the presidency, or the Senate and the presidency, there's an expectation. But when you control the House, the Senate, and the presidency, there's an obligation. We have an obligation to pass the George R. Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We have an obligation to do it because there should be no-knock laws. They should be eliminated. No no-knock laws. Breonna Taylor would still be with us. We have an obligation. We have an obligation to pass legislation that will give the District of Columbia statehood. Here's some facts that you need to know. There's some inconvenient truths that we have to deal with. Here's one. D.C. has a higher per capita tax rate than most states in the country. D.C. has been trying and has been denied statehood for centuries. Friends, it is about more than taxation without representation. It's about overtaxation because of underrepresentation in the Senate of the United States of America. That's what it's about. And we have got to pass it. We have an obligation. We have an obligation to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And here's why. We have a right and an obligation to do it because Dr. King marched so that we might have these voting rights. Schroeder, Goodman, and Cheney gave their lives so that we could have these voting rights. Medgar Evers was murdered on his front porch so that we could have these voting rights. We have a duty to those who have shed blood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The truth of the matter is this. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 may have been signed in ink by President Johnson, but it was written in the blood of those on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, on the blood of John Lewis, on the blood of Medgar Evers, on the blood of Schroeder, Goodman, and Cheney. We must pass it, and you have to help us get it done. If you're going to help us pass it and you know it, stand up and show it. Let's stand up and give the Voting Rights Act the motion, the energy it deserves. Are you with me? Are we going to move? Can we do it? Let's do it together. Remember, I'm Al Green. I love you. Let's have some love and happiness for the good times. Let's stay together.
That was Al Green. We are watching the March On for Voting Rights from D.C. It happened last week on the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's March on Washington. Very poignant event, very powerful event. You can follow what the folks are doing at marchonforvotingrights.org. I'm Julianna Forlano. This is act.tv. Please subscribe to us, share us, etc., etc. You don't see other people doing this, really just straight up covering what the progressive activist movement is doing. And I think it's important. I think you should take a moment to click. Stick with us. Our next segment is going to cover an action and a study about the costs of war since 9/11. It's been 20 years since the attacks of September 11th, 2001. The post-9/11 wars, often fought, by the way, under false pretense and even more often fought over oil, have cost us, both financially and in human costs. Yesterday, the Costs of War Project presented some of their findings from the most comprehensive and widely cited assessments of the financial and human costs of the past 2 decades of war. They found the wars left 929,000 people dead and cost us $8 trillion. Wars for oil that cost $8 trillion. I wonder how many solar farms we could have bought with that kind of dough instead of killing people for the oil. Anyway, actTV covered the broadcast. My guess is MSNBC, CNN, Fox, and many of the other more mainstream news outlets have not covered it, nor did they even reference the study. Why? Well, first, they're too busy taking the president to task for exiting, albeit less than gracefully, one of those aforementioned expensive and deadly wars that we were talking about. And secondly, the mainstream media outlets are all, and I mean all, financially tied to the war machine. I'm not sure how we're going to trust them. We have to find alternate sources of getting our information, and that's what we're providing you here at actTV. I didn't also notice any mention of this study in the New York Times either, maybe because they don't want anybody to be accidentally reminded that they lied us into one of those bloody endeavors. Oops, I just accidentally reminded everyone. Anyway, Linda Bilmes of the Harvard Kennedy School helped us get just a bit of context about how much money, $8 trillion, that we in the United States spent on these wars actually is.
Let me just call attention to the magnitude, to the scale of this number. Dr. Crawford said that the cost, as tracked by the excellent Cost of War Project, is now $8 trillion. But it's easy to forget the scale because of the fact that $1 trillion is in the English language rhymes with million and billion. So I usually explain to my students ways to visualize $1 trillion. And one way to visualize just the scale of that number is that if you had a $1,000 bill, $1 million would be 4.3 inches high, and $1 billion would be 358 feet high, which is about the height of the Statue of Liberty. And $1 trillion is 67 miles high. That's well into actual outer space. That's a lot further than Elon Musk went in his rocket last month. And another way to just think about what can we buy for $1 trillion is to look at the infrastructure bill that the Senate just passed last month. And this infrastructure bill had a price tag of $1 trillion. And that $1 trillion can pay for fixing America's roads, bridges, tunnels, airports, electrical grid, for cleaning up toxic waste dumps, bringing high-speed internet to rural areas, and other things. So if we just pause for a minute, that's just $1 trillion. And think about the fact that we have spent $8 trillion in these wars, and think about the opportunity cost of this sum of money. It is a very staggering number and very sobering to really think about the cost of these wars. And that's just the budgetary cost. Now, let me make 3 points about veterans issues. And my father was a World War II veteran. My father-in-law was also a World War II veteran. And so this has been a personal issue for me to track these costs for many years. And it's important to understand that while the fighting for the US in Afghanistan may be over, but the cost of taking care of those who fought is just beginning. So there is always a tail of cost after the fighting ends in a war. The peak year for paying disability benefits for World War I veterans was in 1969. The peak year for World War II veterans benefits was in the 1980s. And we are just now approaching the peak of paying benefits and healthcare for Vietnam veterans. So this is always a long tail. But this time around, the cost will be much higher. I have conservatively estimated it will be at least $2.2 trillion. And this is due to higher survival rates among those who are injured, better and more expensive medical care, better outreach and communication to let veterans know what they are entitled to, positive efforts by the Department of Veterans Affairs to deliver more care in the community, to expand programs for women veterans, for mental health care, and for homelessness, suicide prevention, and a wide range of things. But consequently, there are already 1.8 million post 9/11 veterans who have already been awarded lifetime disability benefits, and in most cases, medical care. And there are hundreds of thousands of others who still have claims pending or haven't filed yet, or who are still in the military and have not been discharged yet. So I estimate that the cost of providing veterans benefits and VA programs to deliver them and medical care will cost from 2.2 trillion to 2.5 trillion. And most of that cost is still ahead of us. And that is a conservative number, which is not counting the claims that may result from exposure to burn pits and the contractors who were injured and who will be showing up on the rolls of Medicare and Medicaid and other government subsidized healthcare program, and not including the long-term economic costs.
Military component of in U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, a significant, dividend of having peace would be the slowing of the impacts of climate change that we are all living through right this very second. One of the speakers, by the way, mentioned how many lives are lost in slow motion, basically, because of the tremendous destruction of infrastructure we visited on these countries. So the 929,000 figure actually drastically undercounts those casualties of war because, the ones that happen because people have been cut off from clean drinking water, from hospitals, from supply routes. And those deaths would happen, not just instantly because of a drone bomb, but I believe they should count. Yes. Representative Barbara Lee of California was the only person to vote against going to war after 9/11. Here's her courageous and principled floor speech that she gave just a few days later, explaining her vote.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, and I want to thank our ranking member and my friend for yielding. Mr. Speaker, members, I rise today really with a very heavy heart. One that is filled with sorrow for the families and the loved ones who were killed and injured this week. Only the most foolish and the most callous would not understand the grief that has really gripped our people and millions across the world. This unspeakable act on the United States has really forced me, however, to rely on my moral compass, my conscience, and my God for direction. September 11th changed the world. Our deepest fears now haunt us. Yet I am convinced that military action will not prevent further acts of international terrorism against the United States. This is a very complex and complicated matter. Now, this resolution will pass, although we all know that the president can wage a war even without it. However difficult this vote may be, Some of us must urge the use of restraint. Our country is in a state of mourning. Some of us must say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause just for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today so that this does not spiral out of control. Now, I have agonized over this vote, but I came to grips with it today, and I came to grips with opposing this resolution during the very painful yet very beautiful memorial service. As a member of the clergy so eloquently said, as we act, let us not become the evil that we deplore. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
Representative Barbara Lee of California was, again, the only one to vote against going to war after 9/11. That speech was from 9/14. You know, while the drumbeat for war was continuing to go louder and louder. It's a very brave stance she took. And here is the statement that she made for the Cost of War Project event that was held yesterday.
Hello, I am Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and I represent California's beautiful 13th Congressional District. Thank you to the Cost of War Project for inviting me to join you for this very important conversation. Today, yes, we are all focused on Afghanistan. Just last week, we lost 13 United States service members and many Afghan allies and children as a result of a terrorist attack. It's heartbreaking, and my prayers and condolences are with their loved ones and all of those impacted. It's crucial that we continue our evacuation efforts and provide humanitarian support to the people of Afghanistan. It is also critical that we understand how we got to this point, as well as the true financial and human costs of the past 20 years of war. Now, 3 days after 9/11, when Congress voted to authorize military force in response, of course, you know I could not vote for this. I voted no, because I fear the consequences of giving the president, any president, open-ended power to use military force anywhere against anyone or any nation. Those consequences have been devastating. Trillions of dollars and almost 1 million people killed directly as a result of the post-9/11 wars. I would like to acknowledge the important work Costs of War is doing to document the unacknowledged costs of our post-9/11 wars and how important this research is in our fight to end forever wars. This includes my bill to cut $350 billion from the Pentagon's budget in order to reinvest in human needs, which your research cites. Thank you again to the researchers, advocates, and everyone here today for all of your very great work. Keep up the fight. Let's fight for peace and justice and security.
Again, that was Barbara Lee of California. And bringing us home, Ro Khanna, also of California, where they're apparently allowed to be anti-war. Here he is with his comments on the project.
Hi, I'm Congressman Ro Khanna. I want to thank the Cost of War Project for the extraordinary work you do in documenting the unacknowledged cost of wars. We have been at war for almost 20 years after 9/11. In Afghanistan, in a war that had no clear mission, and in Iraq, in a war that had no clear strategic purpose. Many people don't know the extraordinary toll these wars take, not just the cost of deploying troops, not just the cost in terms of human lives, but the cost in terms of benefits and in terms of our obligations for decades to come. My team and I rely on the Cost of War to give us an accurate sense of how much money is being drained because of these endless wars. I read somewhere that had we not stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years, we would have had enough money to provide a free college education or vocational school for every American in this country. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your service in helping us understand the true costs. You are a resource to our office.
You've been watching the act.tv coverage of the Cost of War Project, an event that happened yesterday. You can find out a little bit more about that by going to the hashtag on Twitter, hashtag 20, the number, hashtag 20, the number, years of war, 20 years of war. You're watching act.tv. Please follow us across platforms, and please excuse our background today. We had enormous technical problems, and we're here and we're pulling it out in a more casual manner than usual. So thanks for that. Stay tuned. Up next, our interview segment today, Professor Richard Wolff surprises us with his views on whether we should forgive student loans. President Biden recently directed the U.S. Department of Education to extend the freeze on federal student loan payments for an additional 6 months. His long-term agenda also calls for canceling up to $10,000 in student loan debt for each person who borrowed that money. He's also calling for tuition-free public college and more. Joining us on the program today to discuss the effects that this might have on each person and on the economy, Professor Richard Wolff, host of Economic Update, also an author of several books, including the most recent, The Sickness is the System. Professor Wolff, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Julianna. Glad to be here.
Well, this is kind of an interesting thing. The activists were hoping $50,000 per borrower would be canceled. Biden is tinkering around, seeing if he can do a $10,000 forgiveness plan. What are your thoughts on this idea in the first place?
Well, let me put it this way. I like to get into this issue by starting at the beginning, and namely asking, what kind of a society is it that says to young people, able and willing to give years of their time to develop their education, their skills, their competence, their capability of contributing to the society for the bulk of their adult life? They're willing to do that. That's a very good thing for any society, to have people getting that kind of quality education, because the rest of their lives in their jobs, they'll be giving back to the community that helped educate them. In many societies, that's how it's understood. And therefore, here comes the punchline. The idea of requiring these young people who are going to be doing this valuable contribution to society to go into tens of thousands of dollars of debt to be hanging over them like a sword of Damocles, this is crazy. And in case you're wondering, let me give you an example. At my last count, 8 of the European countries, 8 of them, starting with the biggest and most important of them economically, Germany, have eliminated all tuition and all school fees. To get a college education in Germany costs you nothing. You still have to pay your room and board, your upkeep of your body and your mind, but you do not pay fees. And the Germans are so convinced of the value of this that they make that available not just to German citizens, but to anyone who comes to Germany, wants a student visa. You can go to college. It will cost you nothing. And their reasoning, they're very upfront. We think many of these people will stay in Germany and they will then contribute. And that's a real benefit for Germany, because I'm going to take as an example, somebody comes from Nigeria. It's Nigeria that's paid for that young man or woman's education up until they get to college. So all of the costs of getting them ready for college are borne by the Nigerian community, but it's the German community that gets the benefit of those who decide, maybe because they got married or because their lives changed, to stay in Germany, which is a healthy number of them. I mean, if that's happening in Germany, a close ally of the United States, what exactly is the justification for imposing that? I find that craziness. So let me say that first. So number 2, it follows, of course, that I would like to see us get rid of this indenture for students, this almost encouraging students. And I don't know how many there are, and I'm not sure any data could capture this, but I would like to know How many young people sitting around the kitchen table with their parents talking about going to college or not are dissuaded because the family, especially now, doesn't have the money to pay, and those young people don't want to go and borrow the money because of the debt that it'll mean, because of the fact they'll often need a counter signature from their parents and puts them at risk. I mean, this is an awful mess up of a way to handle higher education. So I'm in favor of it all, but I do have to say one thing which may make some of your viewers upset with me. If you're going to give an amnesty, you're basically going to say, forget 10,000 or forget 50,000. You're saying something very painful to the people who have done without all kinds of things in their lives because they didn't want to accumulate this kind of debt, who forewent marriage, who forewent children, who never bought a house, things they might have done if they let the debt accumulate, but they didn't. We ask people to have that mentality. We teach our children not to get loaded up with debt. Those who behave that way and are now looking at themselves and saying, I was an idiot. I missed an opportunity. I could have gotten this forgiven. And then I want to remind you, student debt is only one of the 4 levels of debt that plague the American working class. Mortgage debt for your home, car payment debt for your automobile, and credit card debt for your plastic. I mean, yes, the students have a claim, but don't the other people too? I mean, let me be real honest with you as an economist. Since the 1970s, we have grown the consumption of this country. Standards of living have risen, but the wages didn't. For the first time in the history of this country, the rising standard of living which we enjoyed wasn't paid for by a rising standard of wages. You know what paid for it? Credit. MasterCard, Visa, and all the rest. And now let me make clear to you what that means. Most of you that I'm talking to, your job depended on the ability of your employer to sell whatever it is your job helps produce. And the reason your employer could hire you was because your employer could sell to people who didn't have the money, but who got credit. We've all benefited from that credit. So if we're going to relieve some people of the burden, on what justification in the world could you not do that for the others? And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes. I think the people who run this society would like to give the students a break for not good reasons. They hope for the votes and all the rest. But they don't do it, and they won't do it. And that includes Biden, which is why he won't give more than a small amount of money, which leaves students with still a big fat burden, is because he's afraid of what I just said. He's afraid that if the rest of the people burdened by mortgage, car payments, and credit card see what those students got, you're going to see mass movements demanding parity for them. And who amongst us is going to say that that isn't justified?
Well, this kind of just happened to me. I paid off another chunk of a student loan, and then I read about how he's going to forgive. Like, what? I want my money back so that I can have the forgiveness. But what came to me is many of these borrowing institutions, be it a credit card, be it a mortgage operation, a bank, be it, and the student loan people, they're predatory, and they're worse than they're super predators. I would hesitate to say. Isn't there a way that instead of maybe forgiving across the board money, which I'm not going to say no to, President Biden, and I do really want you to do that, wouldn't there be a way to sort of curtail the predatory nature of these establishments? Maybe say, listen, everyone who took a student loan out has to pay it back, but there will be no interest rate. I mean, people aren't going to be mad about that. They'll say, what about my credit card? And then maybe we could get them to drop interest rates on credit card. There could be another way around this. What your thoughts?
There are many ways. Nobody should ever think that this is a technical problem or some kind of economic problem. It isn't. It's a political problem. That's where it starts and that's where it ends. Let me give you some examples. In many, many countries of the world and at many points in American history, state governments and the federal government have taken the step of controlling interest rates. I mean, with a law that says the interest rate cannot go above X percent ever for anything, end of conversation. Let me remind everyone about human history. For 1,000 years, you had European feudalism, 500 to 1500 AD. The dominant political and philosophical power in that time was the Roman Catholic Church. And one of the central doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church, and I'm not asking you to agree or disagree or endorse, but just to understand what the church did. The church said that usury, that was the word they used then, borrowing money and lending it at interest, so that you gave somebody $100 as a loan, and they had to give you back $100, say at the end of the year, plus $5 for interest. The normal, what we all understand as lending money at interest. The church said that's usury. That's not a good thing. That's very bad. God, Jesus, or however you make sense of all of that, doesn't like it and will not like you if you do it. Not only that, but at certain points in the church's history, if you do that, we will cook you, and that won't feel good either. So the church banned it. It was a sin. It was against church. Go read your Thomas Aquinas or your St. Augustine. You'll find it. And here was the reasoning of the church. A person who borrows is a person in need. You don't respond to a person in need by taking advantage of their need to say, I'll give you something, but you gotta give me more back than I give you, because that stinks as morality and we won't have it. My guess is an awful lot of people would find that reasoning kind of persuasive about how to make a community cohere. We don't take advantage of people who need. Well, once capitalism came along, in which everybody was borrowing money and investing it, they had to get rid of that. And the church had to let it go. They didn't want to, but capitalism proved stronger than them. We could have a rule that says it is immoral, which it is, to charge people 10, 20, 30%. I don't know if most of your watchers and audience are aware. The banks today that issue credit cards, they borrow money at the Federal Reserve for less than 1%. And the average interest rate they charge you on your unpaid balance on the credit card, that's in the neighborhood of 17 to 20%. You understand? The money costs them 1%. You pay them for that money 17 or 18 or 19%. By the way, that's why banks are made out of marble and occupy those impressive buildings. You're paying for that. And the law could change that tomorrow. The law could make that. Here's another way. We could have public banks in the United States. Banks owned and operated by the government. You know what? Most countries have that. France has it. Italy has it. Germany has it. What's going on here? And you know what? Those banks could set the interest rates. They could say, if you come to a public bank, you can borrow at 4%. If you want to go over there to that private bank, be my guest, they'll charge you twice that. But you want to control interest rates? Real quick. In France, a country I know very well, the post office is a bank. In other words, when you go to the post office, you can do all your banking, your credit card, your savings account, your checking account, whatever your mortgage, whatever you need. The government runs it and puts it in every post office because they're already everywhere. They're convenient, located in the country. So it was genius cheap way to have banks available. Therefore, they can lend at a lower interest rate, and all the privates have to go. I could go on and on for hours with the ways this could be done. So when someone tells, well, that's not workable, that is BS, and I won't say what those letters mean. I hope you know.
I'm pretty sure my audience knows that one. Professor Wolff, that's interesting. You gave us some an alternative way of looking at this. Even the right wing hasn't, as far as I've known, said something like, well, what about me, my credit card? You know, they've really, their only talking point is this would cause hyperinflation. If we forgave people's $10,000 of people's student loan, they'd have money in their pocket, and then they'd go buy things, and then all the, you know, it would everything would go up. The cost of things would go up. Your thoughts about those talking points?
Yeah, I mean, many of the interests, the biggest corporations, the people made wealthy by big corporations, are funding the right wing in the United States, and they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. Few people do. So yeah, they're going to look for every kind of solution other than those that might pinch the profitability of their funders. They have been captured by their donors, which is a serious problem for all political movements and for all politicians. You just look around, you can see what I'm talking about. Now, inflation. Yes, that's become a bugaboo again, an inflation. And inflation is when all prices go up. It happens. So we're always at risk. In a capitalist economy, inflations happen. Even in non-capitalist economies, they can, but they've been particularly a problem in capitalism. So it's always relevant to say, gee, let's worry about an inflation, because it's like saying, gee, let's worry about a bad storm. Sooner or later, we're going to get one. That's not too sharp. The question is, what causes it? And here's where this noise comes. They don't like something, these right-wingers, whatever it is, the government doing this or somebody else doing that. And so they scare you. If you let this thing happen that we don't want, it's going to make a terrible inflation for you. Well, since 2008 and 9, when we had a terrible crash of capitalism, the federal government has been pumping new money into the economy on a scale we've never seen before. Every year since that started, basically 2008, when that crisis hit, every year money was printed at record rates, dumped into the economy. And every year, right-wingers and conservatives told us you mustn't do that because it will cause an inflation. You know, when Obama came into office early in 2009, he had a big boost of the money supply, and all the Republicans, inflation. We had no inflation. We had no inflation in 2009 or 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 or 14 or 15, you know. I mean, a broken clock is correct twice a day, right? And right-wingers have about the same record. They're just using that as a scare. But you don't answer that by saying, oh, no, it can never happen. Some of my liberal colleagues respond to the right wing by giving erudite statements about how it's not going to happen. That's stupid. We don't know that. Most of the great inflations have happened when a large number of people didn't expect it, didn't have a plan for how to prevent it, didn't have a good solution for it. So when the Federal Reserve governors get up there and tell you, we know the inflation we're having now is temporary, that's a prediction of the future. The place you get that is at the carnival. And the lady tells you who you're going to sleep with in 2 weeks, and you giggle because you know that's funny. If you get all upset because you don't like her that much, then you've misunderstood what this is about. Janet Yellen is the head of the Federal Reserve. Janet Yellen and I were classmates at Yale at the same time. We have the same teachers, the same books, the same curriculum, everything. I know that she knows that an inflation is something that needs a lot of conditions to be in place before it happens. And that when it happens, it is very hard to put that genie back in the box. She knows that. So that if you hear statements from her or from her colleagues that we know the inflation won't get out of hand, that's this. They're hoping that's all it ever is.
I can't imagine. I mean, we talked about in a previous interview, we talked about the Fed and we talked about the environment, but it does seem like we're going to have some runaway inflation once these continued storms start to hit. And we also spoke about weather patterns changing where I live. There's a lot of growers and farms not too far away from here, and they have been unable to produce produce this summer because it's too cold. It's not sunny. It's a short growing season, and it's basically been raining the whole time and cold. I mean, I think
there's one other thing, Juliana, that your comment brings to my mind. We're reading a lot in the press right now about what are called global supply chains. And the idea here is a lot of the things we need in our economy have to come from a very long distance. And all kinds of trouble, fires, climate change, pollution, civil wars, all kinds of things, or that ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal and all of that. And I always scratch my head. I want to remind everyone, there's a reason why the inputs to our economy don't come from Tennessee or Idaho or California or Mexico or Canada. And there's no mystery. We don't have distant, long supply chains because of some mysterious event. American corporations decided starting in the 70s that they could make more money closing down upstate New York, which used to be an industrial center, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, all those places, and moving to Shanghai or Brazil or India, because they could make a lot more money. But you know, a side effect of that is a long supply chain. The stuff has to come from China all the way here or from Brazil, and that can get interrupted. But they didn't care because they were looking for the profit. If you don't want to be victim of a long supply chain and of the risks, that would have to be in your calculation at the get-go. We don't do that in capitalism. We let those capitalists decide based on what's profitable for them to do it. And then they come to us now and want us to understand it's a long supply chain. Hello, where were you when this was done? You know, were you not there? Or were you out?
What happened when I didn't see this coming. Well, I'm sorry, but people saw this environment business coming from.
And if you didn't see it coming and it's messing up the economy now, who do you think ought to pay for that? The average person who has to pay too much for their bread or their milk or their cookies or whatever else, or their appliances, or maybe you folks who made the decision that created those long supply chains.
Oh, there's always so much more to cover, Professor Wolff, and it is great to have your voice on our program, especially in what's, these very difficult times that we've been going through. So thank you so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure, Juliana, and I look forward to the next time.
I do encourage everyone watching here to follow Professor Wolff on YouTube. The show is called Economic Update. The channel is called Democracy at Work. Professor Wolff has several books out, including the latest, The Sickness is the System. I do encourage everyone to go and read those. Thanks again for joining us, Professor Wolff.
Thank you, Juliana.
You're watching ACT TV. Stay with us. Oh, hi. Sorry about that. I just gave a whole speech. You missed it. Due to mute. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'm Julianna Forlano. This is actNOW. This is our new show here on ACT TV. Please, find us, follow us, tell your friends about us. We're covering progressive activism and bringing you the voices from the street, the voices from the protests, the voices from the marches that the other channels basically just do not do. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with Greg Palast. See you then.